how much of the space is actually on the video? So if I stay in front of the slides, I'm okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Decent crowd. I think it's been a long time since I've given a talk at a standing room only room, so thank you all for coming. So hopefully you're all expecting to hear about ways to measure the quality of your Perl code. Is it okay if I just go on in, Lee? Cool. So we'll have a quick look at what we're going to do. Why would I want to do this? What can I possibly measure? How can I do it? And then we'll finish off with looking at some ways that you can show off your work at the end, which is obviously the most important part. Okay, so start with why. So Peter Drucker is a management consultant, and one of the things he says is you can't manage anything that you can't measure. So what he means is that in order to improve something, you need to have a baseline measurement that you can measure that improvement against. To give an example, which would you rather hear? Oh, I made that database query faster, or I made that database query 25% faster. And in order to quantify that 25% improvement, you need to know where you started from. So it's all about quantifying the improvements that you made. So it's a three-step process: measure, improve, measure again, repeat, four-step process, six-step process. It's a process with steps. Yes, it's an iterative process. That's probably what I meant to say. So we're looking at measuring, then improving. So what we're looking for here is a set of values that you can track over time to demonstrate the improvement in the quality of your code. Yeah, managers love all that stuff. Yeah, imagine if you could show your manager a graph that looks like this of the quality of your code improving every month. Okay, so that's a quick look at why we want to do this. What are we going to measure? So we need dates, obviously, to put in our graphs, and we need numbers. We need measures of quality. Dates are easy. I'm not going to cover that. Just go to a calendar. But what numbers can we use to measure the quality of our Perl code? Well, I've been working in this area for quite a long time, and I've been trying to work out the best way to achieve it. And the conclusion that I've come to is that there are no numbers which directly and accurately measure the quality of of your Perl code. So I'm sorry for wasting all your time. That's the end of the talk. No. What we need is we need to use proxies. What are proxies, Dave? I hear you say. Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to tell you. I asked Wikipedia, source of all wisdom. In statistics, a proxy is a variable that is not in itself directly relevant, but that serves in place of an unobservable or unmeasurable number variable. And we're in the situation where we have what is unobservable or immeasurable. Moving on, in order for a variable to be a good proxy, it has a close correlation, but not necessarily a linear correlation with the variable we're actually interested in. And also it's interesting to note that the correlation could be positive or negative. Now, some examples might make that a bit clearer. It is difficult, perhaps impossible, to directly measure the quality of life in a country. So if you ask an economist about the quality of life in a country, they'll start talking about the GDP per capita of the people living in the country. That serves as a proxy measure. It's difficult to get hard statistics on the climate in the past. So you ask a climate scientist how they get their figures, and one of the things they'll do is they will measure the width of tree rings back in the past, count the number of years back it was, and the width of the tree ring tells them interesting things about the climate in the past. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about for proxy values. So I'm going to propose 4 proxies that we can measure for our Perl code. Here they are: test passes, test coverage, Perl critic, and the cyclomatic complexity. Although if you saw Ovid's testing talk on Wednesday, he rather drove a hole in these cyclomatic complexity argument, so thanks to him for that. Let's look at the 4 in a little bit more detail. I think this is probably uncontentious, that code that passes its test suite is presumably better than code that doesn't pass its test suite. If there's a failing test in your test suite somewhere, there's probably a problem in your code. Or in your test suite, which is part of your code. So there you go. Test coverage. So we're getting into a little shakier ground here. So code that has a test suite that covers more of it is likely to be better code. And I'll go on to likely there because. Moving on, Perl critic. Now, I'm sure most of you know Perl critic runs against your code base and tests it against some list of best practices that has been, well, it was originally based on Damien Conway's Perl Best Practices book, but has been adapted and extended. So, code that conforms to an arbitrary set of best practices is better than code that doesn't. I think so. You could probably argue the case there. And finally, the cyclomatic complexity one basically comes down to simple code is likely to contain fewer bugs than more complicated code. And I just wanted to take a little bit of step aside to explain a little bit more about cyclomatic complexity, because people often haven't heard of it. So basically, it's a measure of the complexity of a code, and you just count the branching points in the code, the number of loops, the number of if statements, and things like that in a subroutine. One way of doing that in Perl is a module called Perl Metrics Simple, and if you're interested in learning more about how this works, I actually wrote an article about Perl Metrics Simple in the Perl Advent Calendar 5 years ago on the 8th of December, so there's a little bit more explanation there. But if you wanted to also get a feel for the kind of numbers that we're talking about, one of the things that Perl Metrics Simple does is it spits out an HTML page showing you the details, the values for your code, and it's got a little legend at the bottom, the numbers. So anything you can see, anything more than about 10, and you might want to take a closer look at that function. I have worked the first time that I explored using this module on a Perl codebase. I was working with a large fashion retailer in London. Some of you might be able to work out who I'm talking about from that. And we had things that had complexity numbers in the 300 and something this was a code base that all the developers were terrified to go anywhere near. Okay, so 4 proxies, and I know that they are all potentially contentious. We could argue about which one, but that's why they're proxies. Measuring something is better than just giving up and saying there's nothing that we can measure. Okay, so we've covered the why, we've covered the what. Let's talk about the how. How are we going to do this? So what we'd like to do, we would like to measure each of our proxy values on a regular basis. What do I mean by a regular basis? Well, perhaps weekly. That might be enough to draw that graph that makes your manager happily. Perhaps daily might give us a better way of looking at it. Maybe on every commit. Basically, we're looking at something. We want this to happen automatically in some way, which sounds like a job for continuous integration. Those that might not know what continuous integration is, it's still a relatively new concept in some parts of the industry, which surprises me, but that's the way it is. So a continuous integration system, it monitors your source code repository and takes various actions in response to various events, which is very vague, but that's because they're flexible. Continuous integration environments that you might have heard of: Jenkins, Travis, CI, Circle, CI. There are obviously others. I got an email from GitHub this very morning promoting GitHub Actions, which is a similar kind of thing. And so your continuous integration server does things like, when code is committed to any branch, run this task. Or every Sunday at 2 a.m., run this task. Or when code is merged to the release branch, run these tasks. Where task might mean, task is basically anything that you can write a script for. So that might mean run tests. It might mean email someone. Or increasingly, I see things that it does things like build a new Docker image and deploy that to a staging environment, run some tests. If the tests all pass, then send an email to somebody asking them to press a button that authorizes a deployment. You also see it when people really trust their tests that final step doesn't happen. It builds the Docker image, deploys it into a staging environment, runs the integration test suite. If that passes, pushes it live. That's the way that big companies like Netflix, for example, push out hundreds of release versions every day of the week by using systems like this. So all that means it's perfect for our requirements. So what we're saying is every time a piece of code is committed, we run a series of scripts that measures the proxies, records the values in the database against today's date. Oh, and plots a graph, because managers. It's one of those nice things, the idea of a build radiator, one of those large monitors, a TV screen that you have on the wall in the development group area that cycles through various useful graphs, number of tickets. on, there's a thing called Kritika Dot Io. Again, as I said, you sign up with your GitHub account, give you a list of your Kritika account, and Kritika gives you a mark. So basically, I think it covers other languages than Perl, but if you give it Perl code, then it basically runs a Perl Critic session against your code and gives you like a school grade. It will give you an A or an A minus or a C. Again, it gives you the information about the commit. If you click this link here that says violations, it lists the violations. It tells you actually what you need to fix in order to get those extra points. Also on that page, there's a graph of the violations over time, so you can see this one's been actually quite steady at just that one violation. I think I'm using capitalization for a variable that Perl Critic doesn't like. You can actually get in and those of you that have used Perl Critic know that you can set up your own themes for Perl Critic, turn various rules on, turn rules off, add other rules, where you've got access within the settings of Kritika to do that here as well. And then also on that Kritika page, there's a graph of complexity, and it will show you the complexity of the individual files down to the function level. And so I've got at least one function that's got a complexity of 10, and like we saw from the legend a few slides back, that's about right. Anything higher than that, and I might give it another look. I've got a couple of modules that have got some things that are about 12, and I keep thinking I should have a closer look at those, make them a bit simpler to understand. So by adding Kritika into the mix, we've ticked Perl Critic and we've ticked the cyclomatic complexity. So we are able to measure all of the proxies that I suggested. And it may be that the fact that it's quite easy to measure these particular 4 proxies influenced my choice of proxy slightly, you might think. Yeah, so it is easy if you're using these tools to actually keep an eye on these proxies and therefore have a view to the changes in quality of your Perl code. Okay, so to summarize, to show off the way that things are improving. Everyone likes badges, right? I don't mean stick it on your lapel badges, but those badges that you see appearing all over the place, these two-tone things with those badges are cool. And all of these services, they do generate badges. So Travis CI will give you a build passing or build failing badge. Coveralls will give you the amount of your coverage in a badge, and the color of this background changes. Kritika will give you your mark in a badge. Sometimes you see people putting these badges on CPAN pages. For example, this is an extract on, if you go to Meta CPAN, this is Inge's IO all module, and he's got his Travis CI build passing. Sometimes you'll see, actually on quite often on GitHub at the top of the README, you'll see 4 or 5 badges stacked up, showing you what the current status of the repo. But I decided I wanted a status page for all of my CPAN modules. So all this other clever stuff that I've been talking about, this is stuff that other people have written. In the last couple of minutes of the talk, I can talk about stuff that I've written. So I built this dashboard page, which you can see running at code.perlhacks.com. And you've got a list of all of my modules here. There's another badge which I haven't talked about. Where do I get that from? A place called shield.io. And it, you just give it the name of the module, and it queries the MetaCPAN API and tells you the version number, the current version number on CPAN of that module. And it changes the background. Blue, basically blue is good, and it means that the version number is 1.0 or higher, and there's a red background for anything that's lower than 1. I guess that's danger. So I've got a few modules there that I'm quite happy with that I should probably just bump the version number up to. Then just for completeness, I've got a link to the GitHub repo, and then I've got the Travis CI, the coveralls, and the Kritika badges. So there's a couple of, so you can see I've got a couple of repos here where I need to do work on the coverage. All of the Travis ones you can see here are build passing. That's not actually true of all of my repos at the moment, but I am quite happy that all of my Kritika marks are A, because I'm an A-star student when it comes to writing Perl code. So the code to that is on GitHub. It's just called Dashboard. It's a very simple program with there's a config file which is YAML, and basically all you need to give it is your CPAN ID, and it then uses the MetaCPAN API to get all your distributions, and then there's a template toolkit template that it just runs to, and actually you only run it once, or you would only run it when this list changes, because all of these are generated on the fly by JavaScript calls. So actually this page, it runs as a GitHub page because it's a completely static page. It's only when I need to add, and when I've either gained or lost a module. Actually, I need to remove array compare because I've given it to Mohammed now. So that's quite an easy way to just, and if I'm bored on a Sunday afternoon and I think maybe I should do a little bit of work just touching up one of my CPAN modules, then I can go here and it gives me clues as places that I might want to have a look. So yeah, the code is there on GitHub if you wanted to do the same for your stuff, and if you do find it useful, I would appreciate a tweet or some or an email telling me that you've used it. So in conclusion, why do we want to measure the quality of our Perl code? So that we can quantify the improvements that we later make. Notice I haven't talked at all about actually making the improvements. That's left as an exercise to the reader or watcher or whatever. What we're going to measure? Well, you need to find proxy measures. You might not agree with the 4 proxy measures that I chose, but they work for me, and they are particularly easy to trace. But feel free to choose your own, and I'd be fascinated to hear what other measures you might come up with. But the 4 that I've chosen are covered quite easily with pretty standard tools. How? Well, we use continuous integration to automate the process. And then to summarize it, we display badges because badges are cool and everyone loves badges. And we use my dashboard. Well, I use my dashboard, but feel free. It's yours. Take it. And as I said, actually improving your code is left up to you. I have nothing to say about that. I'm 15 minutes short on time, so which means we've got plenty of time to have a discussion. Gents.
Do you know that there's a thank you badge allows people to thank you.
How would that work? Where would I put it?
You, like all other badges, and then you have a whatever Twitter-like target where people can write, "Thank you, Dave. Great module, great dashboard, whatever."
That sounds awesome. For the video, Jens is just saying.
All your modules and
Put a thank you badge. So is that? I guess it's kind of like a Facebook like for.
it's more like criteria, not like Facebook.
Okay, all right, but it sounds like an easy way to get a lot of external validation, and that sounds like a pretty cool idea to me. I think you have first.
Can we and should we gate the metrics of the new type? Say in a pull request, have it, you need to reduce complexity here.
Should we gate the?
Should we gate the view processes on you must have either improved or not made worse, say, the cyclomatic complexity?
Oh,
Could you repeat the question?
yeah. So the question is, I mentioned how a lot of these metrics can be fed back to GitHub and are displayed as a pull as data on the bottom of the pull request. Now, anything that can be displayed in that area of the pull request can be turned into a rule in GitHub saying this PR cannot be merged unless it cannot be merged if the coverage, for example, has fallen. And he's saying, should we use that kind of feature? And those sort of features are great, and I do use them, and I've worked for companies that use them. But it all goes to hell when something's gone wrong and you need to get a fix out as soon as possible, and you don't care about the coverage for that half an hour. So yes, but
with an override.
yeah.
This cyclomatic complexity, was it calculated with Perl Critic in the background? So
No.
Which provided it as a service, but where can I get it on my own? The cyclomatic complexity.
Well, so the Perl metrics. Yeah. So the question is, where does Kritika get the cyclomatic complexity from, and can I just grab that bit to use on my own code before doing anything else with it? I don't know exactly where Kritika gets it from. Maybe that code is open source and you can have a look. However, if you want to do it yourself, then Perl metrics simple is on CPAN, and there's an article on the Perl Advent Calendar explaining how to use it.
People tend to get good values, but this didn't improve the code quality because they tried the easy way to get a good measurement. Did you experience something like this?
So, yes, I'm just about to. So the question is, to paraphrase the question slightly, is there a danger that developers will write code just to address the metrics and to improve the metrics in a way that doesn't actually improve the quality? Yes. Before I took on a slightly more complicated approach like this, I used to trust CPANs. I mean, and I still, I'm not saying that I don't trust CPANs anymore. It's still a great resource out there. That, for those that don't know, it's a service that monitors CPAN for uploads, and then every time an upload appears, it downloads that file, that distribution, and runs various tests against it and gives it a quality score, where quality is KWAL, because it's almost quality but not quite. And I have been guilty of setting aside a weekend to improve my quality scores without necessarily improving the actual quality of the code, I suppose. So yes, people can game the system, but I guess you just need to trust your developers, I suppose. If you don't trust your developers, then hire better ones. I don't know. Anyone else? Yes. Hi.
Have you any evidence that the proxies you are suggesting are valid?
Do I have any evidence that the proxies I'm suggesting are valid? Absolutely none. And in fact, if you, well, personally, I haven't done the investigation. If you saw Curtis's talk on Wednesday, he went into a bit on cyclomatic complexity, because it's common sense, right? That simpler code has fewer bugs, is easier to maintain. But apparently that's not true. And he had science to back him up. Bastard. So no, I mean there probably is, there almost certainly is research into this kind of stuff. I personally haven't taken the time to look into it. I mean, I guess you've got Paul sitting just behind you. Did you do any research into how coverage affects, or was it just a cool tool that you wanted to write?
I did research it myself, but I know other people have done, and that's why.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, at the back.
How do you like performance as a proxy?
How do I like performance as a proxy? I don't know, is performance really a measure of quality? I guess it depends on this. I mean, there are obviously there are systems where performance is paramount. But the problem there is that if you have a system like the CI system that I'm talking about here, getting meaningful performance stats out of that when it's so far away from your production environment. I mean, I guess you can measure relative changes, which would be useful. So yeah, I would have no objections to anybody adding that, and I think Sawyer's going to make a point about that. Yeah.
So for this, even if you were to measure degradation performance,
yeah.
in some cases you would say you cannot degrade a certain amount, so it's a test. But in some cases you might say, compared to the feature that I'm adding, I need this degradation and I accept it. So it's no longer a yes or no, like you do with quality.
Yes.
So do you have any suggestions or ideas on how you separate the two things? I'd like to know about this, but accept it, versus I want to know about it and never accept it if I see it.
Yes, so the point that Sawyer's making is that you can measure relative changes in performance, and sometimes you might be prepared to accept a fall in performance because you've added this really vital feature, which is all implemented in JavaScript and just locks the page for 5 seconds on every page load. And how do you separate those two concerns? My feeling is that is a product owner decision, and that you can take the data to them, you can get the requirements, and they say this is really very, very important, and you can look at it and you can suck your teeth and say that is going to have an impact on performance. I can just see in my head the database queries that's going to, but I'll try it and I'll come back to you with data about and then a week later you come back and say, right, it looks like in the staging system that this causes a 5% increase in page load time. Now, in the production environment, we know this page loads on average at this time. This means it's going to be this much. Do you still want to go ahead? I think that's not a developer decision. We give them the power to make the call, but it's not our job. James again.
Yeah, it's more to Sawyer. It's a remark. I had several projects where we had the requirement of doing X hundred transactions per second. So there was a remark, we were not to get lower that. And in another project we had, for example, time pressure to get some features finished, and code complexity does not really matter for the date. We had time later to fix it. So this is part where you initially came with your graph. So you have a graph, you have your analysis tool.
Yeah.
It's not a hard test which can fail or succeed.
Yeah.
You have a picture, and with this picture, as you said, you go to the project owner and say, can you live with it? Or
so I guess what correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is that at times, because of the pressure to get something out, you may accept a dip in that graph. But from my point of view, if I'm seeing a dip in that graph, I'm also wanting to see a load of tickets in Jira about how we're going to clean up that technical debt at some point in the next 6 months. Is that okay? You haven't had that one yet.
Question, any of these processes able to detect increase in memory consumption of the application or memory leak?
None. So the question is, do any of my proxies give you any feedback on the amount of memory consumption or perhaps memory leaks and things like that? And no, they don't. But that again, along with the performance.